Hey guys, Alex here from Mental Health Thinking. Last week I talked to you about depression and some of the cycles that happen during it and what you can do to cut them off. This week, as promised, I'm going to talk about some of the vulnerabilities that you can develop over time or have from an early age that can lead to many different sorts of mental health problems. And I should say that they don't necessarily lead to mental health problems, they can just lead to some more difficulties in life. And I bring them up because these sorts of things can actually be combated and changed around. So I'm going to put them up on the screen around here and here and here and here and maybe here. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is coping styles or coping strategies that people have. Now, everybody has some sort of coping strategy. Almost all coping strategies will work in some cases, and some of them will work for just about your whole life. And the point is recognizing when things change and trying to spot when those changes are going to mean that the coping strategies you've used in the past are no longer going to be helpful. So currently I've been working with people who have been diagnosed, often recently, with some sort of chronic medical condition. One of the things I look for here is when people have a really active coping style, where when things are stressful for them, when things are sometimes going wrong or sometimes just a little bit difficult, then they cope with that by going out and exercising, doing all that sort of thing. Now that's usually a pretty good coping style. Just as a general tidbit, it's the one that I usually use. But for people who have been diagnosed with, say, a heart condition or a respiratory condition or something like that, that means that they can't get the same amount of exercise as they got in the past, then that coping style isn't really something that they're going to be able to use to the same degree. So you look for that at the start so you can start developing different coping strategies so that you can deal with it a little more effectively, given that your resources now have changed. Your ability to do certain things that you used to do have changed. Oftentimes people have a planning coping strategy, and it means that they really try to think things through and come up with a solution. Now that's a really good one as well in most circumstances, but sometimes you get to a place where there really isn't a solution. And really the best thing to do then is to plan to a certain degree and then realize where that planning stops. Make the distinction between proactive, productive thinking and worry, which is that kind of cyclic thinking about these things that may not go well in your life. So that can lead down to having poor sleep, and it can actually be just like one of those cycles in depression where people worry and they spend their time worrying about things, and that makes them feel down. And then because they're feeling more down, their brain goes straight to those worries again, as a cycle on and on and on. Another coping strategy is suppression of competing activities. So something's pretty hard in this section, so these other things are just going to go by the wayside a bit, and that's often okay as well, as long as it doesn't get too much that you're putting things off long term that you really need to be doing. So let's say that work got a bit stressful. You had more things that you had to do in work, so you're like, all right, well, I'm gonna stop doing these hobbies for a little bit just so that I can get my handle on that. That could be perfectly acceptable. Allows you more time to deal with your work, and then later on you can get back to your hobbies. But what if that stress doesn't go away? What if you become more and more stressed in one area and then all of these different things go by the wayside? Now that can lead to that whole inactivity premise that there was in depression, can't it? Where you start putting off your social activity, you start putting off all of these things that you used to enjoy, all just to do a little bit better in one area. And then you find that actually you do worse, even in that area that's stressing you out, because you become more easily stressed out when you don't have those releases. Now there's also restraint coping, where you hold off until the moment's right, or until you feel that the moment's right. So you might hear someone say, I make sure not to make matters worse by acting too quickly. Often a really good reasoned approach. But what if there's something that's really time sensitive and it's so stressful that they rely more heavily on that coping strategy and they hold off and they hold off and they hold off and they don't act in time? Now, those are the main coping strategies that I wanted to talk about today, just so that you're aware of some of the main ones that people use. And you can see how, look, they're not always maladaptive, they're not always bad. None of the ones that I talked about are always bad. They're generally really useful when applied to the right situation. But it's easy to go for simplicity as people and to have one strategy that fits all. And sometimes what's always worked in the past, due to some changing circumstance, is no longer going to work as well in the future. So we just need to be aware of those sorts of changing circumstances, be aware of one single strategy that we use, and just try to think of some other strategies that might be helpful to turn our frontal brain on, basically, which is our ability to think through things on the spot and change things that we already did, rather than the usual processes, that autopilot that will go toward practicing things that we were already doing.